Alright guys, so basically with section 3 here, we're going to talk about the framers' original idea of how to choose the president, and then we're going to talk about how political parties has changed the landscape of how we vote. Alright, so it's kind of a unique section, okay? At the bottom of the paper, just like normal, we've got a couple of definitions that we need to talk about. You got a presidential elector, and you have electoral college. So let's go ahead and jot down what those may be.
Hey, your notes ain't popping up.
Hey, can you use plastic bottles in the water refill?
I'm assuming you can. Refresh it. Everybody else?
No, I know. But this is like popping up.
There's a lot of people opening it. I have the notes on the board.
Oh, okay.
As long as you get what I'm filling out, you're fine. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. So.
How many is that today? 2? I think you should just start smoking.
Trying to quit. All right.
Trying to
So,
quit.
a presidential elector, guys. This goes along with the electoral college, and again, how we actually choose who the president is going to be. We're going to be doing that in a couple months. Or actually, yeah, about 2 months. So, the first definition you have down there is a presidential elector. Your book definition says that it's a group of individuals who cast a formal vote that chooses the president. Just simply put down that these are the individuals who choose the president. Flat out just choose the president. Okay? Again, at the bottom of your paper, this is number 6, I believe. These electors pledge to vote for the president. Now, they may pledge to vote for the president, but do electors have to vote the same way as their state vote? What do y'all think? Some scenarios, yes, because states have laws that say they have to. Other states, they don't. And I'm going to show you guys some electoral maps, probably tomorrow, that shows you how one state may have wanted the Democrat or may have wanted the Republican to win, but then one of the electors voted against the way their state did. But anyway, presidential elector is one of the people who officially cast the vote for the president. All right? And then the last one down there, you got the word electoral college. It says that it's a group of people chosen from each state and D.C. to formally select the president and the vice president. So, just put down a group of people who selects the president and vice president. Now, I just gave you 2 definitions of 2 different things that are very similar. So in your mind, you should be thinking that these are presidential electors are part of what?
Congress.
Well, yes, but they're part of the electoral college. Y'all with me there? Mm-hmm. These presidential electors make up the electoral college. That's what I'm getting at. Okay? Is everybody with me on that one? Makes sense?
So you said for the last one, a group of people that choose the president and the vice president?
Yeah. The idea behind the electoral college, when we first started voting for the president, the framers suggested that all the electoral college had to be was knowledgeable people voting for the president. They didn't think everyone should be able to vote. You guys understand that? They wanted people who they felt like were in the know, so to speak, be the ones that get to cast their vote. Now, obviously, as long as you register and you're not felon or things of that nature, you can vote.
Why does that matter? That's my question. Like being a felon.
I think it's just one of the punishments they have for being a felon. You know, you got to be able to get that right back, so to speak. You know, I don't have a problem with them not being able to own a gun. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I don't think felons should own a gun. So, but anyway, I think it's just these people, these presidential electors, they're knowledgeable, and that's the way of keeping the electoral college sacred, because they wanted knowledgeable people. So they are the ones that cast the official vote for the president and the vice president. All right. So let's go back up to the top of your paper here. And number 1 says, what were the 3 methods of presidential election discussed by the framers? Well, if you guys have learned anything about our government and our Constitution, it's that we always like to call a meeting and discuss every type of angle we can have, right? When we were trying to write the U.S. Constitution, Virginia brought a plan, New Jersey brought a plan, and we ended up compromising with the Great Compromise, right? Had to figure out what to do with slaves, and we had to figure out what we're going to do with the slave trade. So this makes no different. You know what I mean? Like, we're going to debate and we're going to argue and we're going to fuss and we're going to try to figure out the best method of how to choose the president. So our framers came up with 3 concepts, okay? And we're going to see them in your notes. It says, how does the process of choosing a president change over time? First, it's kind of like the electors cast 2 votes. One was for the president, one was for the vice president. You guys see how that could be a problem? If the president, whoever got the most vote became the president, and whoever got the second most vote became the vice president, could that be a problem later on down the line?
Yes.
Yes. If we would have kept this way until present day, let's say that we used this method in 2016, whoever got the most vote was the president, whoever got the second most vote was the vice president. Hillary Clinton would be our president right now, and Donald Trump would be the vice president. How do you think that would have worked? Probably not very well, right? So obviously we had to make a couple of changes to it, okay? The next part there is talking about the 12th Amendment. If you'll notice in number 5, it's talking about the 12th Amendment, so we'll get to it in a few moments. And then it says electors are pledged to vote for their party's candidate, and we'll talk about the electors and what they do in a second. So their biggest question here is, what were the 3 methods of presidential election discussed by the framers? So it says the framers of the Constitution debated whether to have the president chosen by Congress or by the popular vote of the people. So what they were basically arguing about was, should we just allow Congress to do it, let them pick who they wanted, because obviously they would be knowledgeable, right? Yes. Or do we want the people to do it, where obviously some of them may not be as knowledgeable as people in Congress. So opponents of congressional selection felt it would upset the separation of power between the executive and the legislative branch. And what that means is this: if we just allowed Congress to choose the president would feel like Congress was his boss. Does that make sense? Because they're the ones that picked him. And we created the branches to be equal, right? So if the legislative chooses the executive, that sounds like a parliamentary form of government. We don't want that. Y'all with me? So that was one of the arguments to that. The other argument was that if you have a popular election, meaning if you allow the population to vote, it felt that the people would not know enough about the candidate. Again, you get unknowledgeable people. Okay? So we've got to kind of figure this part out. So in number 1, we're asking you what were the 3 methods of presidential election. We've already talked about all 3 of them right here. The first one, put down by Congress. One of the ideas was to allow just Congress to vote. Okay, so elected by Congress. The second method was through popular vote. And what it means by popular vote, guys, is through the population. Okay, just allowing the people to pick who it was. Okay. And then thirdly, we basically decided on which method. What do we call the method we have now? The electoral what? The electoral college, which has the electoral vote. So you should have electoral college in number 1. So the 3 methods that were discussed by the framers to choose the president was just simply allowing Congress to do it. The second method would be through popular vote, by just letting the population do it. And then you have the electoral college. Well, we have the ability to have hindsight. We know what happened. So we eventually settled on which one of these 3? The electoral college, correct? All right.
What's the third one?
The electoral college.
Electoral what?
College.
College?
It's those presidential electors. All right. So, gives us a little background about the electoral college. Number 2, I think, is asking you, how did the framers arrange for the electors to choose the president and the vice president? The original plan for this, guys, is not what we have today, okay? So we're kind of going to go through how we chose the president in our early years of a democracy, and then we're going to talk about how we chose them in the later years, like present day, okay? So how did the framers arrange for the electors to choose the president and the vice president? We kind of touched on this already, okay? Put down that they would cast 2 different presidential candidates. So it would be just like we do now. You'd have 2 different presidential candidates. So you'd have 2 different presidential candidates. So everybody got that part down? All right. The person who gets the most vote becomes the president, and then the runner-up is the vice president. Jot that down. Whoever gets the most vote is the president. The second most becomes vice president.
Which one is this one?
It's still number 2, okay? And we've already kind of talked about why this would be a problem, right? And it's on the board. It says each elector would cast 2 electoral votes, each for a different candidate. The candidate with the most electoral votes would become the president. The candidate with the second most votes would become the vice president. Problem being, you're going to have people who disagree with one another trying to run the country. Okay? So, it says the framers did not anticipate the rise of political parties competing for the presidency. If you guys remember, in our earliest forms of elections, there was no such thing as a political party. You know, nowadays, when a president gets nominated by a political party, he gets to choose his running mate for the vice presidency, right? He gets to pick them. Now, they probably got to go through some approval type situation, but for the most part, the president gets to pick who that individual is. In the early days of elections, whoever lost became the vice president. So technically, just by losing, you won. You know what I mean? You still got in office. You're just second in command. All right? So the rise of political parties affected that. If you look at number 3, it says, why did the framers choose this method of electing the president? And then what kind of person did they envision as an elector? Well, guys, common sense. Originally, the framers wanted Congress to choose the president. Or, excuse me, they did not want Congress or the popular election choosing the president. They didn't want either one of them doing it. They wanted the electors to be respectable, well-informed citizens. So in number 3, the framers chose the Electoral College because they didn't want just Congress or just the people choosing the president. You guys understand me? Put down that they wanted respectable, well-informed citizens choosing the president. That's the answer to number 3. Respectable, well-informed citizens making the decision on who would be the president. That's why we chose the Electoral College. Okay? Is everybody with me so far? You got a good mix of who gets the vote in this situation. So your notes takes you through the election of 1796. It says you have a Democratic Republican whose candidate was Thomas Jefferson. He finished second to a Federalist named John Adams. If you guys remember, John Adams is the second president of the United States. Okay? Jefferson then became Adams' vice president, even though they were political rivals. So obviously, the guy getting the most vote, then this guy getting the runner-up. That's not the best scenario here, because you're getting competing views in the White House. Okay? So that happened in 1796. In the election of 1800, for the first time ever, each party nominates 2 candidates. One for the president and one for the vice president. Now, if you'll look at question number 4, it says, how did the rise of political parties affect the Electoral College? There is a very long answer to this question. Okay? But we're going to make it simple. Put down it is because, number 4, how did the rise of political parties affect the Electoral College? Put down that the political parties nominated a president and vice presidential candidate. So you no longer have the person getting the second most vote becoming the vice president. You guys with me? So once political parties came into the fray, this is number 4, they started nominating a presidential and vice presidential candidate. So now you're going to have people of the same type of thinking in the White House. Y'all with me? Please tell me this makes sense. Everybody good? Okay. So, that's the rise of political parties. It affected the Electoral College because they started nominating a vice president with a presidential candidate. That's how I would put that. Okay? So, number 5 is asking you about a specific election and then the passage of an amendment. Now, I've already told you about 2 amendments in this chapter. We talked about the 25th Amendment, which is the formal way that the Vice President takes over the presidential office. And we talked about the 22nd Amendment. Y'all remember what it is? It put a term limit on the amount of terms the president can serve. Y'all remember writing that down the other day? So now we're talking about the 12th. So this test you guys are going to have has the possibility of having 3 amendments on it that you're going to need to know. So, how did the election in 1800 lead to the passage of the 12th Amendment? Well, you probably got to have an idea of what the election of 1800 did in order to understand what the 12th Amendment is, right? So if you look at your notes, it says in 1800 the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans faced each other again. For the first time, each party nominates 2 candidates, one for president and one for vice president. John Adams and Alexander Hamilton formed the Federalist ticket, while Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr were the Democratic Republican candidates. So you got two here, okay? Each party also nominated electors who, if chosen, swore to vote for their party's presidential and vice presidential candidates. So let's stop right there a minute. These electors from each state, their job description was, once your state votes and all the votes are tallied up, whichever presidential and vice presidential candidate had the most, you have to pledge you'll vote for them in the election. You guys understand that? That's how it works. So, in the map to the right, it says the orange areas voted for Adams, the green voted for Jefferson. Now, just simply looking at that, it looks like a pretty close situation, right? Pretty close vote. What ended up happening, as per the Electoral College rules, each Democratic elector cast 2 presidential votes, one for Jefferson and one for Burr. And as a result, guess what happened? You get a tie. Okay? They tied, guys, 36 different times. They voted on this 36 different times. And it came out to be a tie each time. It was suggested in history that Aaron Burr made the comment that Burr and Jefferson should just have a duel. And whichever one of them didn't die got to be the vice president. Yeah, that's what they got to that point with it, okay? Obviously, that didn't happen, okay? But as a result of this, we've got to figure out what happened. So, popular opinion favored Jefferson, who had run as the party's former presidential candidate, but there was no rule stating what should he do if there was a tie. So instead, it took the House of Reps 36 separate votes to break the tie and elect Jefferson, making Burr the vice president. So, as a result of the election of 1800, and let's look at number 5. It says, how did the election of the 1800 lead to the passage of the 12th Amendment? The first thing I would write down in that question is what happened during the election of 1800. Put down that there was multiple ties during this election. Multiple ties. So how did the 12th Amendment correct this? Now you guys remember, up to this point, whoever got the most vote is the president, right? Whoever got the second most vote is the vice president. So now what we've decided with the 12th Amendment, and you need to write down that the 12th Amendment was ratified in 1804. So 4 years after we have the election that ties everything, this amendment goes into place. And this amendment ensures that there would never again be a tie, because each elector had to cast a separate vote. So what that means is this. When I went to vote, if I'm elector, I had to choose Jefferson, president, Burr, vice president. I couldn't just go cast my 2 votes and not say what they were for. You guys understand what I mean? So if you look at the board, it says the 12th Amendment separates the vice presidential and presidential election. So that's how I would write it. Beside the 12th Amendment, put down that it separated the vice presidential and the presidential election. Now, we're still trying to vote for a vice president during this time frame. What did political parties do that caused all this to stop? I've already told you this. I just want to review a little bit. They started nominating a presidential and what? Vice presidential candidate, right? So once they took over, you just had to cast one vote, and you were getting two individuals. Does that make sense? The 12th Amendment said we had to separate that vote. Now that's the notes as far as today goes. Does that make sense? Is everybody with me on that?
Yes, sir.
All right, tomorrow when you guys roll in, we will continue through section 4, where we talk about the nomination process and the keynote address and platforms and things of that nature that the president has. And so hopefully we'll be able to wrap this up. So by the end of the week, we guys can possibly get a study guide and a test knocked out for chapter 13. Okay?